Give me some, yes, give me some love. All right, so sometimes when there are empty seats in an early morning general session, this is a very data-driven way to judge that last night was awesome. Right? Right, I ran it through the Vertica database, so I know it's true. Okay, but we also have another way to show what happened yesterday, and that's the video montage I'm going to share now. That was fun. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but one of the most common themes in the video and one of the key value propositions of this whole conference is talking to each other, talking to people who might know something you don't know, sharing a best practice or a story, asking questions. That's why we decided to bring you all onto the stage this morning to talk and ask questions. Now, you might be wondering, this is not a big enough stage for all of you, so how are we going to do that? It's going to be the URL right here, crowd chat. So, how many of you have, I mean, if anybody doesn't, I really want to get to know you, your phone, a laptop, a tablet with you right now? Show me your hands. How many's got them? Okay. How many of you are now going to log into crowd chat to ask questions, to comment, to chat with theCUBE on the stage? That's what we need you to do now while I introduce Chris Selland, our VP of Business Development here at HP Vertica. Chris?
Thanks so much, Joy, and it's great to be here. I do hope everybody had a good time last night. When you said there was a theme, I thought you were going to say the theme was cubes. There was a lot of cubes in that video, and we're going to have the cube up here in a second. Before we start, though, two kind of quick things I want to mention to everybody. First of all, I want to take a moment to call out and thank all of our sponsors. Let's have a big hand for all of our sponsors. Without their support, and many of them are in the room, hopefully all of them are in the room, this event would not have been possible. We greatly appreciate their participation in this event. I know all of you have been to the partner zone because that's where the meals are being served, that's where the cocktails have been served, speaking of fun. But when you're there, please take some time and please go visit our sponsors. These are all companies that have complementary technology solutions, services in and around the big data ecosystem, the ecosystem that is so, so critical to us. And so critical to each one of you. So please take some time to go visit and spend time with each of our sponsors today. and our other partners as well. And if anybody needs introductions, who do I talk to or whatever, come see me, come find me. This is absolutely critical to our event. It's critical to our business, and it's critical to your businesses as well. I also want to mention, and I will, by the way, put the crowd chat URL back up, particularly for those of you with mobile devices who still need time to type this in, that there has been a slight misprint on the agenda. The sessions in the Haven track this morning at 9:40 and 10:30 are reversed. The 9:40 session is actually the 10:30 session and vice versa. They're in the same room, so if you're participating in the Haven track, it shouldn't affect you too much. That's also true of the website, by the way. But both the website and the printed agenda, the 9:40 and the 10:30 sessions are inverted in the Haven track. Just wanted to let each and every one of you know that. So that's the end of the housekeeping. Without further ado, speaking of cubes, let me invite up the two hosts of theCUBE, who you've probably seen outside, Dave Vellante, John Furrier. Dave and John, come on up. They're going to walk you through how to use crowd chat, and then we're going to put all of you on theCUBE as well. So Dave and John, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. So John Furrier here, Dave Vellante, and we are co-founders of a company called SiliconANGLE Media, which is a combination of Wikibon, which is a research organization. Think of Wikibon, we started Wikibon, it's Gartner Group for free. So it's all out there, wikibon.org, go use it. And John founded SiliconANGLE.com. And then we launched in 2010, John, theCUBE. And theCUBE is interesting, right? theCUBE has negative connotations, doesn't it? But then we saw yesterday, Tarek, it's got some cool positive connotations, and of course, we love theCUBE. And John also started a project a few years ago called Crowd Chat. So why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so you've got the URL right there. So go to crowdchat.net. It's a new technology we call an engagement container. It's basically a chat room using the hashtag HP Big Data 2014. You got to log in with Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and it allows people to have a joint chat. We're going to be fielding questions from there. So you have to sign in to comment, or you can just watch it if you don't want to sign in. But it just sends all the tweets to Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. So jump in, you can see, just type in your thoughts, and then threads of conversation. We'll be taking questions from you guys. And it's great, Dave, to be up here because we went to the first Hadoop World and then Hadoop Summit when that started. We've been to all the big data shows, and this show here is really about the individuals, the practitioners, and real players in big data. And it's really been fun to interview all the folks. We've had some great conversations, and it's been great.
I had to ask, John and I met in 2010, and one of the first things he told me was Hadoop. John's from Silicon Valley, I'm from the East Coast, so we're a little slower to pick up some of the trends. But I had to ask them, what's Hadoop? And then we were doing Hadoop World, and John said, get out of wherever you are and fly to Hadoop World with me. And that sort of started us on the big data track. Now, Jeff Kelly's coming up later, and Wikibon did a big survey this year, and he's going to share the results of that survey. We wanted to make some observations as we're firing up the crowd chat about some of the discussions that we've heard on theCUBE and maybe some of the observations that we see in the marketplace. And I guess I'd start by saying, I feel as though that this crowd is, I would put in the early adopter camp. I think many of you as Vertica customers started down the big data journey and predated Hadoop. So question, how many people here actually use Hadoop? How many organizations? Okay, and how many actually use Vertica versus sort of kicking the tires? So about the same, maybe a few more are using Vertica, but we noticed that the big difference between this year and last year was the preponderance of companies that were, John, you talk about born in the cloud, that were born in big data, born data-driven, that are now bringing together their Hadoop initiatives and their Vertica and other big data initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Dave, one of the things that we saw with mobile first was a big buzzword people have been talking about, and that really spawned massive growth. You're seeing the user behaviors changing. We had CB on theCUBE talking about user interfaces, everything, and that applies to everything from developers to users, and mobile started that. Now you hear the buzzword cloud first, and one of the things that I see is a data first strategy, and I think you have a new generation of individuals essentially born in big data, and that's a mindset. It's a cultural shift, and that truly complements the whole DevOps cloud movement and essentially accelerates more mobile apps, more user experience. So it's seeing a really generational shift, and those value propositions in big data just are going to create massive disruption. So I see a whole new set of opportunities coming just from this born in big data cultural shift. And you can just see in the young guns out there in the industry, from startups to the guys in organizations saying, hey, I'm the Moneyball guy, but I'm going to do it for my organization, referencing the whole, Oakland A's Moneyball thing with big data. And that is truly happening. And I see real examples from coders to individuals and analysts, big data scientists, where these kids have never loaded Linux on a machine. They're like, what? Loading patches? And that's a whole, it's a mindset. So that's the DevOps and big data coming together.
So some examples of folks on theCUBE yesterday that are sort of born in big data, born data-driven. Wayfair came on, Cardlytics. Cardlytics is an interesting story. It's really, Jeannie Ross, who's a MIT professor, wrote an article. You may not need big data after all. You got to do more with your little data, and that's really what Cardlytics is doing for any of those folks who know them. Yammer, Ad Marketplace, Full 360, Peak Games, Etsy, and Localytics. These are all companies that we would consider sort of, born in a data-driven culture. Having said that, many of you were not born data-driven. The average age of an enterprise app is about 19 years. And so many of you have very complex application portfolios. You've got enterprise data warehouses that many of the practitioners in the Wikibon community say is like a snake swallowing a basketball. Every time Intel comes out with a new chip, you got to buy it, you got to make things go faster. But one of the things we've noticed in our research is that there's a clear share shift going on. So I want to ask you, so the data, and Jeff Kelly will talk about this, is a very large number of folks that we talk to are shifting resources from traditional enterprise data warehouse to new big data, Hadoop, Vertica-like workloads. Now, maybe you don't think of it necessarily as shifting, but think of it in these terms. Which is growing faster? So if you define that share shift, that spend shift in those terms, if you had $100 to spend, where you're spending more, where you're spending less, how many people would say that over the next, let's say 18 months, you're going to shift resources from traditional enterprise data warehouse to Hadoop? How many people would say that? So most people are saying, a few are saying that, many are not. It's interesting, Jeff Kelly will talk about that a little bit in a moment. We also heard, great conversation with the CIO of the USPS, US Postal Service. He gave a phenomenal discussion yesterday, Jim Cochran. And he talked about the #1 customer for him is the chief operating officer. Any CIOs in the audience? Any CIOs? Anybody work for a CIO? So we were at MIT a couple weeks ago speaking to John Halamka and some other CIOs, very prominent folks, and they were calling into question the future of the CIO, saying that they said the CIO role is going to sort of morph into a technology role, CTO obviously, and the COO, for whom many CIOs work for. And they feel as though that a new role will emerge called the Chief Data Officer, and that's the individual that has responsibility for data governance and data quality. Now, when we asked this audience last year, very few people had a Chief Data Officer. Anybody here have a Chief Data Officer inside their organization? Anybody? Not one? One, okay. And chances are you're probably in a regulated industry. Is that fair to say? Financial services, healthcare, or government, one of those three? What's big pharma? What industry are you in? Entertainment, okay. So not regulated. But interesting that you got a Chief Data Officer. So we've seen this role emerge much more strongly in those regulated industries, John.
Yes, so David, we're getting some questions from the crowd chat. So one says, how are you seeing enterprise clients, those not born in the cloud, adopting, migrating to cloud? So great question. Keep the questions coming, just type them in. What's your take on that?
Sorry, I missed the question.
The question was, how do you see enterprise clients, those not born in the cloud, adopting and migrating big data solutions to the cloud?
So we do see a lot of discussion going on around how they can get the most value out of their existing enterprise data warehouses and still invest in new emerging applications. And so we talked yesterday a lot about this DevOps culture. And it's a really hard thing to do. You say, okay, we want a DevOps culture, but you can't just go out and hire DevOps people. But so what people are doing, I'll give you an example. One example is Munder Capital, one of the practitioners in the Wikibon community. They're finding they have to train people in-house, bring in the best of development, bring in the best of operations, and actually train people to have this sort of DevOps mindset.
Yeah, I mean, also there's a shift going on. DevOps used to be a very positive term, especially in Silicon Valley when you saw companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon really innovating kind of in the cloud. But you had to be a special individual to kind of have those skills. I mean, Facebook's motto was move fast, break stuff. You can't do that in the enterprise. You don't break anything. In fact, Facebook's motto now actually is move fast and make it 100% reliable. So the shift from DevOps to what we call essentially engineering focus, and Andrew was on theCUBE yesterday talking about this, is a real cultural thing. It's not about DevOps because it's becoming a negative connotation now, because are you a developer or are you in operations? And in enterprise, operations kind of trumps developers sometimes, and developers sometimes trumps operations. So really it's coming down to a debate of just engineering. And that's
and
really,
software engineering, right?
And writing code. So code drives everything. So you're seeing the shift away from the word DevOps to software-driven or software-defined infrastructure as code. I think that's a great trend. I think that's more engineering-focused, less trying to pigeonhole someone as a DevOps.
So the thing I'd add is, people process technology. How many people here would consider themselves IT practitioners? Are many people here business analysts, or are many people here just not awake yet? Or so, how about non-IT people who care about big data? Okay, so nice mix. But I would say people process technology. IT practitioners will always tell us technology is the easy part. It comes and goes. It's the people in the process that are the hardest part. So the other piece of the question, the people not born in big data, is really get the people and the process piece right first. We see a lot of bespoke big data initiatives going on, and not a lot of thought going on around, okay, what's our data architecture? What are the data sources? What's our data strategy? How do these fit into the compliance edicts of the organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And those things are coming back potentially to bite people. So as IT and business technology people, you need to think about those things up front.
Big data, Dave, is actually maturing. I mean, the bubble phase of big data kind of is over, in my opinion. I think you're starting to see the reality of hitting in. I mean, certainly the bubble conversation is one that everyone's talking about right now with valuations out of control, these startups and companies that are private. But big data is not really a bubble anymore, in my opinion. You're starting to see the meat on the bone, as we say, start to hit the reality. It's still early days. I think the bubble has shifted to other areas. So if you look at some of the valuations, whether it's a consumer app like the Snapchat worth 30 billion, I mean, I don't know where those numbers come from, and then all this financing going on. But big data is enabling that. So it's shifting the bubble to storage, flash storage. You got to store the data somewhere. So you're seeing converged infrastructure bubble, Dave, and that's really where I see the action happening. Big data is enabling all that.
Well, what about that? You have to have a Silicon Valley view. Is there, I mean, people ask, is there a bubble now in tech? Is there a bubble in big data? You're saying there isn't, but there are adjacent bubbles that are forming? What's your take on that?
I definitely think there's a bubble going on in certainly Silicon Valley and around the world, globally. In China, actually, is a real bubble. A lot of valuations are high in China. There's a global market. So in California, there's definitely a bubble, but I see it as an innovation bubble, and it might burst and the froth might come down, but the disruption is really, like I said, big data shifting to the cloud, and the cloud is really an economic driver, but it's still early. And so big data is not a bubble, in my opinion. You're seeing really good things happen, and the value is shifting to the people deploying big data, but that puts the pressure on the vendors on storage, infrastructure, and that's where you see the valuations. For instance, flash, if you're a flash storage company, your valuations are sky high if you're private. And then also you're a consumer app.
So here at the Vertica conference, it's a very interesting. Vertica is sort of in the middle of this share shift transition that I talked about. It's not traditional enterprise data warehouse. It's not pure play Hadoop. It sits in the middle, and it brings in some of the best of those both worlds. SQL, Hadoop, playing. Colin yesterday talked about we used to be a column store, a feature product, and now you look at the platform. You talk to people like Shilpa Lawanda, and she talks about how the platform is being built out. So that is an interesting dynamic, again, that we're going to talk about. Some of the other things before we go on to the next segment, there's definitely a lot of action in ad tech to bring together analytic data and transaction data. And again, I think that's where a company like Vertica sits. CB from Etsy, Chris Bond, said, the best hacks are the ones that last the longest. So we're all doing hacks, is what he said. The best ones are the ones that last the longest. And then the folks from Cardlytics, Craig Snodgrass, said, we're trying to build Google for BI. So that's another big trend. The notion of putting self-service BI in the hands of business users. You hear companies like visualization companies talk about this a lot. And that's another big sort of white space and gap that needs to be closed. So John, there's an elephant in the room, right? There was a big deal announced recently between HP and Hortonworks. HP made a $50 million investment in Hortonworks, so we want to talk about that a little bit. So we're going to invite Chris Sellen back up on the stage with Mitch Ferguson of Hortonworks. So gentlemen, come on up.
All right. All right.
All right, so thanks, gentlemen. So let me start, Chris, with you. Why did HP make this move?
Well, if you remember about a year ago, a little over a year ago, we announced this strategy called Haven and a platform called Haven at HP, where the H stood for Hadoop. It was a recognition that among our customer base, among the companies that are adopting and seeking to adopt big data, Hadoop was becoming increasingly important to them. And Haven was designed to be an open platform to encompass all the different flavors of Hadoop, the different distributions, and so on and so forth. And as we've gone over the last year plus since we announced Haven, and we've had a number of customers express to us that this is great. But it's also been clear that the convergence between Vertica and HP and Hadoop is so strong that we really needed to get even deeper into the game.
So does the H in Haven now stand for Hortonworks?
Well, that's what Mitch says, right? So
I believe.
All right, so let's take it from your perspective, Mitch, from Hortonworks. I mean, you saw a big raise. Intel made a big move with Cloudera. From your perspective, why this move?
So Hortonworks and HP have been working together for probably 12 months. And you look at the assets that HP has, both with storage and compute and software, with Vertica, with systems management, with autonomy, a variety of assets. We very much see Hadoop at Hortonworks. We see Hadoop as part of the modern data architecture. Also part of that modern data architecture is compute and storage, and as that continues to evolve. And structured data stores like Vertica and autonomy, providing various types of analytics capabilities on top of a modern data architecture, whether that's deployed on-prem or in the cloud. HP has all of those assets, and I think is in a very unique position to leverage those and really help major enterprises adopt this modern data architecture faster and more successfully.
So we heard yesterday we live in a world of co-opetition. So Chris, what does this mean for others in your ecosystem? Let's say I'm a MapR customer. I say, hey, I love MapR. I've been using it now for a couple of years.
I was going to ask that question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, John,
you were
finish
going to
it.
ask that question?
No, Dave beat me to the punch. What about MapR?
I was going to ask you when that picture of you was taken, so that was my question.
By the way, for the record, that's the first time in my life I've ever cut off John Furrier.
It's hard. It's not easy to do.
Yeah.
So. But anyway, to your point, it is a world of co-opetition. It's a world of a multiplicity of platforms, and it's a world of openness. And we absolutely are going to continue to support all popular flavors of Hadoop, all of our partnerships. MapR is here. As a matter of fact, I know I saw them in the room this morning. Cloudera is here. So we've got a significant number of customers on, of course, Hortonworks. We've got our investment in Hortonworks. We've got a significant and growing customer base together, but also with the other flavors of Hadoop. And we've got a lot of customers who are also running Apache Hadoop as well. So we're going to continue to support all of those. We're going to continue to work together. Ultimately, it's all about customer success. It's about making customers successful. I think one of the things that I probably bounce back to Mitch, or maybe through you guys, would be, it's interesting because as somebody who's been working with and, really on point with a lot of our partnerships, I think even a year or so plus ago when we first announced Haven, kind of all the flavors of Hadoop or the companies that were supporting Hadoop kind of look the same. I think you're now seeing some divergence, different use cases, different segments of the marketplace. And so, as I think you get into different spaces, different industries, we have to support them all. Mitch has to support them all. We have to continue to really work together to make our customers successful. So we're going to continue to support our entire ecosystem.
We've been a big fan of MapR and Hortonworks, both companies. We know you guys pretty well. But I got to ask the question because we're always trying to read between the lines. Obviously, you guys have a relationship with Microsoft, and you have other companies.
You do?
These guys have a great relationship with Microsoft. So got Microsoft, Hortonworks, HP, Cloudera, Intel. So all this going on. Was this a defensive move or an offensive move for you guys in this deal?
I think it was a right for the customers move, I think was what it really was. So, and I think it was just an acknowledgement again that the integration here is getting more powerful, it's getting deeper, it's, you've got highly complementary technology. And, we have to be able to bring full solutions to market. And we have to be able to solve, it's great to walk in there as partners, but to some degree we also need to be able to walk in there as HP and deliver a complete solution. So, and Hadoop is absolutely part of the solution. So it's the right move for customers is really what it is.
One of the fundamental premises of the research that we've done at Wikibon, and Jeff Kelly will talk about this, is we believe that more value is going to be created by you all, the practitioners, than will be created by the vendor community. Now that's not always been the case. At one point, The combination of Cisco, Intel, and Microsoft accounted for well over $1 trillion of market value. And so again, we think that the transformative nature of data is going to drive value that you all are going to create. But we love to talk about the horses on the track and the competition, and it's kind of fun. But I think it's becoming pretty clear that nobody's going to become a trillionaire based on selling Hadoop distribution. So show of hands again, who's using Hadoop? You guys should all be awake now. Way more hands went up. Who's paying for Hadoop distribution?
No hands.
Anybody paying for it? We got 1, 2, just a handful. So that's interesting. So there's valid reasons to pay for Hadoop distribution, but generally, Hortonworks' strategy is different. You guys have said, we're not going to take money for Hadoop distribution.
We're going to give it away.
So how do you make money if you've given everything away?
Sure. So the premise when we started the company a little over 3 years ago was the fastest way to make the Hadoop market. And when I mean make it, it means allow Hadoop or enable Hadoop to have that functionality that you enterprises expect in a data architecture. And we believe the fastest way to do that was do everything in open source. We didn't believe a company of 28 people when we started, or a company of 200 people or 500 people could evolve the technology fast enough. So when you look at open source, there's a community effect of open source. And if you think about like Hive, the SQL access to Hadoop, more than 40 companies contributed to the latest version of Hive, 40 companies, including Microsoft. That helps this technology evolve that much faster. We believe doing everything in Apache, everything in open source, will evolve Hadoop faster, provide a common version of Hadoop, which is what I think HP and Microsoft and others are rallying around. A common version of Hadoop allows the ecosystem and enterprises to adopt it faster. So our model of providing a distribution and giving it away for free is to help you all start using the software. And we understand you're going to use it, and some of you won't pay any money. That's the bargain of open source. That's how Red Hat became popular. That's how JBoss became popular. That's how the Spring Framework, a previous company that we all were at, became popular. And you know that's the benefit of open source. The beauty is you're able to test it and use the software. If you want to pay, you can. If you don't, great. So our model is to provide enterprise-level support for the Hortonworks data platform the same way Vertica provides it for Vertica. And if people want that level of support and they want the training associated with it, they can enter into a commercial relationship. If they don't, we're going to continue to provide that software and allow you all to leverage this Hadoop technology in a development, proof of concept, or production the way you want to.
What's interesting, Dave, is that we've got some questions coming in from crowd chat. We'll go in a second, but the world is shifting. And it's a choice world, it's heterogeneous, and I think Colin Mahoney said that on his keynote, also on theCUBE, is that not one size doesn't fit all. And we've seen cases, for instance, like with Hadoop and say HBase, and I think it's been called on theCUBE a fine tailored suit. I mean, once you fit it, that's it, only one use case. And that's kind of a trend we're seeing, this full stack kind of IT environment where things are integrated in with integrated stacks, and that's kind of the new integrated model. So you got to have the choice in the code. So I think that's good for you guys being open with MapR and Hortonworks.
So what do you got from the crowd? By the way, I got this if anybody wants to ask a question. I got old school technique too.
Share your thoughts on HP Big Data 2014. Please discuss the platform vision for supporting real-time transactional policy decisions. I kind of don't know what that means, but it sounded good. Real-time transactions. I like real-time transactions.
One of the things we talk a lot about at Vertica, Colin and I actually have this conversation all the time, is there's kind of a price-performance curve in the industry, and not just in the industry, but inside just about every one of our customers. Typical example is I'm looking at customer data, and 95% of the queries I need to run about customer data might be on transactions or social activity in the last 30 days. But at the same time, every once in a while, I might get some queries that I need to look up something that happened a year ago or 2 years ago, and maybe compliance requires me to keep 7 years of data around. So there's this sort of, curve that each of us need to look at, because that last 30 days data is probably more valuable and probably requires more performance than the last 1 to 2 years, last 12 to 24 months, and then maybe the stuff beyond 7 years, I want to keep for when I need it, but unless the regulators come calling, which hopefully they don't, I'll probably never need to look at that. And so there's kind of this value equation, and so we talk a lot in this industry. You were talking about free Gartner. I was at a Gartner conference not long ago where they were talking, the session on Hadoop was all focused on cost, and and that's one of the great things about Hadoop is you can scale out at very low cost. And then the next session was on in-memory, and it was all about performance, but obviously you're talking about a very high price point. So there's this curve of price performance that is what companies really need to start thinking about. And our most advanced customers, we had our customer advisory board, that's exactly what they're doing. They're sort of saying, not all data is necessarily of the same value. We don't necessarily want to treat it the same way, store it the same way, and that's a lot of what we're doing at Vertica with Hadoop. And I think a lot of the technical sessions, which I hear have been packed to the gills, are talking about this, about whether you want to call it information lifecycle management or price performance, but what do we need to invest on what data for what performance in what place? Because it's not all the same and it's not all unitary, which is why the whole ecosystem and why the ability to have this sort of, whether you call it co-opetition or openness, but do the right thing for the customer, and why we need to work with leaders like Hortonworks. So.
Okay, but you are seeing a big push toward, at least in the ecosystem, toward real time, and so a lot of people said, well, Hadoop is batch. It's not meant for real time. You guys, I think, would probably disagree with that.
We would, not probably.
What you're doing with Yarn and other things, and Spark and so forth, right? And you got customers that are trying to do real time. I mean, what's real time? Real time, I define it as before you lose the customer. So, what is the right model? Is it a pure play Hadoop model? Is it a mix of Hadoop and Vertica? Is it a mix of Hadoop and Vertica and traditional transactional systems? Is the answer to that question yes, yes, and yes?
It's a mix.
Yes.
So you think about Hadoop is, version 1 of Hadoop was batch. Version 2 is batch, interactive, and real time. But it's really boils down to Hadoop fits into the architectures that many of you already have, like Vertica. And you're going to take large volumes of data, move them into Hadoop, look at patterns, those result sets, feed them into Vertica, and leverage what Vertica does really well. That's one of the complementary natures of Vertica and Hadoop. Other people are going to want the batch access of Hadoop to do these long-term pattern matchings, for example. Others are going to want to take data out interactively via SQL into a Tableau, into Pentaho, or even move it into Vertica through SQL, and then join that with the other data that Vertica is managing and provide real-time access through Vertica.
So we're going to, go ahead, John.
So my question to you guys is that came up yesterday on theCUBE and also some in crowd chat is, people say we're in a Hadoop world, but also some people saying it's not so much Hadoop, but HDFS. Do you think we're in more of an HDFS world than a Hadoop world, given all the things that are being automated away and simplified?
Well, Hadoop is certainly a lot more than HDFS, and I'll sort of defer to Mitch to,
We're merging into what is called a Yarn world. And Yarn is the operating system for data. So Yarn is what we're working with Vertica on to optimize how Vertica interacts with Hadoop through Yarn. And that would provide real-time access the way Vertica wants to integrate with Hadoop. Other applications, whether they go through Spark, which is really hot right now, is real-time access. Others will go through Hive, which is interactive. And those are different ways that various applications or technologies will interact with Hadoop, whether it's batch, real-time, or interactive. And Yarn takes advantage of how those different applications will interact, but all the data is in the same place. So the applications can be unaware of where that data is. It's just in Hadoop. But then how they're going to get it real-time, batch, or interactive is governed by Yarn, the operating system for data.
Everybody know what Yarn is? Yarn is a resource negotiator. It stands for yet another resource negotiator. So
as technical as I'll get.
Cute acronym.
So we have a question from Terry in the crowd. Question, with big data maturing, where do you see the most energy investment now? What's next? The move to hybrid platforms, data-driven apps. And I'll add to that question for you guys by saying, where are all the apps? 2-3 years ago, it was like the big data apps was the big tsunami when analytics became the killer app right now. So obviously analytics with visualization, Tableau's here. Where's that next investment ground going to be? Where are all the apps?
Yeah, I'd say the Hadoop market is still a young market. And admittedly, a young market. And I think where we've seen the ecosystem evolve thus far, it's been more, my terminology, at the platform level. with data management platforms like Vertica or operating systems or integration technologies, ETL products and analytics products, optimizing how they work with Hadoop. And I think in the next 12 months, you'll begin to see applications, large-scale applications. And we're starting to see this around network threat detection, for example, from some major network vendors. And you'll see Hadoop used as part of applications, and then you as enterprises will buy out of the box a solution that happens to have Hadoop in it. You may not know it, but it's managing the type of data that Hadoop is really good at managing for that particular app.
Yeah, I mean, when we say big data is maturing, I don't necessarily know that I agree with that. I mean, I do agree that big data has become relatively accepted and it's getting adopted, but as Mitch was just saying, and as Colin was saying earlier in his keynote yesterday, we're at a very, very early stage. We're like in the first or second inning here, and I don't even know if it's a game. I think this game's going way into extra innings. This game may never even end because analytics is really changing everything. And I often say, kind of to me, I don't know if anybody remembers the term e-business. Like everybody 10, 12 years ago used to talk about e-business. Nobody says that anymore, right? But again, it was criticized. It kind of was like this term that everybody used. But what it meant was everything was changing because everything was going online. And even though nobody talks about it anymore, everything did change. Nobody uses that term. And I think big data might be 10, 12 years from now, it'll be the same thing. Nobody will say big data. It'll just be data and analytics and understanding our customers and our suppliers and so on and so forth. But I don't know if we're maturing. We are maturing in, like I said, the attendance at this event, that customers are starting to get pragmatic and realize it's not just about buzzwords, and it is about an ecosystem, it is about openness, and it is about all of these different needs. But at the same time, I think we're in the very, very early stages of the game.
Though, Chris, I would agree with you, but the thing that I would point out is that what I like about big data versus the other bubbles that are out there, and reference to kind of bubbles because you're hinting at that, is that there's rationalization in big data. You don't see, like the dot-com bubble for the folks who remember that, pet food being sold online at $1 billion valuation. Eventually that was e-commerce, which is a whole other great growth area right now. But in big data, it's not a frothy market. It's realistic. There's actually real work being done.
Yeah.
Unlike some other, like Snapchat, I still don't understand why they're valued so much. But
so before we let Mitch go, anybody in the audience have any questions? If you don't want to use the crowd chat, I'm happy to bring the microphone over. So we're going to move to the next segment. All right, yeah, we'll get some questions here. All right, great. Just let us know your name, if you would, and your organization.
Yeah, good morning. Jerry Starkwood with HP. I'm just curious, as the Internet of Things explodes and the data requirements explode, are we going to be able to build enough data centers, enough storage, enough power requirements to meet the demand of, what we're going to be doing with data in the future?
Well,
how sustainable is it going to be?
The Internet of Things is a great example of what I was just saying, that it's really just beginning to even be talked about. But if you look at the amount of data that's going to be produced by devices, and any estimates, whether they're McKinsey or Gartner or Bain, it's just, petabytes, zettabytes, yottabytes, is it brontobytes, Colin? I mean, it's just this unbelievable amount of data. So we ain't seen nothing yet in terms of the amount of data that's going to be produced, need to be analyzed. And if you remember that slide from Colin's presentation about, 100 times more data gives, I think, 10,000 times more insight. The amount of data that's coming ahead of us just dwarfs what we're seeing today.
And
so that's a
huge
great
density
example of
problems
why.
that you're bringing up. And if you don't have a PUE of 1.1, you're probably going to be using a mega data center, right?
Well,
yeah, I mean, heat density is a huge
the Internet
issue.
of Things, is interesting. So Jim Cochran it was on yesterday. He was on the Cube. We drilled on him, and his growth area for him is retail and e-commerce. I mean, the U.S. Postal Service has been in business for 200 years doing transactions. They are probably the best use case of legacy meets Internet of Things out there. GE's doing some stuff out there, seeing with machines, but like this notion of they're tracking transactions, it's real time, it's retail. We were joking, you're in competition with Amazon. Will you have drones delivering packages? So they got to be competitive, and that is a huge task for them. And to be competitive in that kind of space with that kind of infrastructure, to me, was so exciting to talk to him because it's the perfect legacy meets modernization case study. And it transcends all the conversations, cloud, big data, mobile, Internet of Things. So that was exciting, and I thought that was an interview you guys should check out at SiliconANGLE.tv.
We have a question back here, John. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning. I came from the Philippines, and we're kind of like starting our journey to big data. However, I'd like to ask you guys, HP made a major investment in Hortonworks. Is there any plan on integrating the Storm, Spark, Yarn, whatever it is called, and Vertica all together? Because at this point, it's like with all the DevOps approach in a financial institution, it's quite difficult to do a lot of changes quickly in such a very short time because of the system development life cycle and all the regulatory requirements. So right now, it's very confusing. You know, it's more than just a bubble to us, you know, non-technical people. And we don't know who to talk to. There's like so many things to put together, like even Haven alone. If you look at the end, it's like an infinite number of applications out there. And to business people, they see the end. They don't see the H, A, V, and E. And before you go to that, you know, starting the journey itself, it's quite difficult. So how does the integration of things happen? And what is the industry doing to put it all together and make it a little bit easier for a more conservative institutions like banks?
So that's great. We got it. So what about that? You know, CIO doesn't want to be the chief integration officer. Mm-hmm. How far can the industry take integration?
Well, that was a big question with a lot of parts of it. I guess one of the things that I'll say is that, and you know, Joy and I have been talking about this a lot. This event, if you've noticed, now up here you've got, you know, we're obviously technology vendors, but for the most part, the track sessions are customers. And what we're a huge proponent of, because again, this is starting to happen and customers are starting to see success, is first of all, you know, the best answers to your questions come from your peers and come from the customers who, particularly the early adopters. I think, Dave, you referred before to this as somewhat of an early adopter audience. But hearing from the early adopters, hearing what they're doing, hearing where they're having success, because there are a lot of buzzwords, there is a lot of alphabet soup. And you know, we've all got our technologies, which obviously we're promoting, and you know, and different technologies for different use cases in different industries. And I talked about the price performance curve, but to help sort that out, the best way you can do it is to network with your peers, talk to other customers, learn what's working, why it's working, how it's working, and also learn what isn't. And that's one of the reasons at this event in particular, we made a real conscious effort to, yes, every once in a while, those of us who are kind of marketing people are going to come up on stage and talk to you, but for the most part, we tried to put your peers on stage so you can really hear from those around you and network with each other, obviously not just in the sessions, but at the breakouts and so on and so forth about what's working and what's not. So the best source of advice are those who are being successful, and to some degree those who have stubbed their toe and find out what they're seeing and finding.
Mitch, integration's hard. You know, what can you add to this?
It is hard, but you know, I mentioned the first core tenet of Hortonworks was do everything in open source to evolve the technology. The second is the ecosystem is critical to the success, because you all are going to want to use Hadoop with other things. So we're working very closely with the Vertica engineering team to optimize how Vertica integrates with Hadoop. You don't have to worry about then Yarn or Spark or whatever. You worry about Vertica, and you already know Vertica. And Vertica gets the data that it needs out of Hadoop through its own integration. That's how we make the market function faster. Providing SQL access on top of Hadoop. Most people know SQL. That helps make the market function faster.
All right, Mitch, well, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to call up, let's hear it from Mitch. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Now, I'm going to call up Jeff Kelly now. Jeff, if you would come up to the stage and take the hot seat. So Jeff, you just did some research. You presented recently at the Hadoop Summit. So you got an audience of IT practitioners. You did this big survey. You talked to a number of folks in depth. You live, breathe, eat this world. So give us the highlights. What did you learn? What are the top takeaways, particularly from the standpoint of the practitioners in the audience?
Sure. So we surveyed essentially some of the early adopters in big data. Almost by definition, if you're going to survey big data practitioners, they're going to be early adopters. It's still very early in this market. But you know, what we found was the vast majority of respondents really see big data as a competitive differentiator that's going to have a major impact on the success of their organization going forward. You know, it was 90+%, you know, look at big data as really the key to differentiation in this kind of new economy.
How many people think big data is a buzzword of unclear meaning? Show of hands. Okay, fair number. What percentage of your survey base thought that it was a buzzword of unclear meaning?
So this may tell you something about the sample, but it was about 1%.
So definitely a leading adopter audience, or one that loves the term.
I would say, and
still some skepticism in this crew.
Yeah, I just mentioned on,
I always hate the term big data.
On CrowdChat that, yeah, the term big data is a loaded one, of course. And really, you know, I think it serves a useful purpose to some degree in when you're talking about the new ways to leverage data, but in the end, it's all data, and it's about the value you get from that data in terms of the insights and the actionable insights. So, you were talking earlier about, is the term big data going to go away? At some point, I think it will go away, and we're really just talking about data.
All right, so what else did you learn that's relevant?
Well, we asked a little bit about, obviously, Hadoop. No big data adoption survey would be complete without talking about Hadoop. About 33%, somewhere around there, of our survey respondents said they've adopted Hadoop in one form or another. Most of those still in the POC phase or pilot projects.
Similar to this audience, by the way, roughly the same.
Yeah, but some of the really interesting findings around Hadoop specifically were around only about a quarter of those respondents who are actually using Hadoop are paying customers of one of the Hadoop vendors, whether it's Hortonworks, Cloudera, MapR, or others. We also saw a lot of interest in SQL on Hadoop. Over 80% of the practitioners who have deployed Hadoop are at least experimenting with the different SQL on Hadoop flavors. I think that's certainly relevant to this crowd with Vertica and what they're doing with the different Hadoop players. I mean, the SQL on Hadoop is an interesting question. You talked about being able to open up Hadoop to a wider group of practitioners, and SQL is certainly one way to do that. But of course, it is just one way. There are other languages and other methods for interacting with and exploring data in Hadoop. SQL doesn't solve all problems, but it is a language and an approach that a lot of practitioners, business analysts understand, and it's critical, I think, critical enabler for the Hadoop ecosystem.
But there's also was a schism. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask Jeff. This question came in. Another question. If you compare Hadoop 2 years ago versus 2 years from now, would you recognize it, and what evolution will it take? So go back 2 years to today. Do you recognize Hadoop, and then go 2 years out? Where is the evolution going?
Well, yeah, and I did respond to that as well in CrowdChat. It's hard to have a crystal ball and make predictions about exactly where it will go.
That's what analysts do. Come on,
that's your job.
True, but I would say this: it's going to be based on how quickly Hadoop has developed over the last 2 years. I would say it's going to be very different than what we see today. I think what we're seeing is, you mentioned, is kind of HDFS where it's at.
Well, do you recognize it now? I mean, what's changed? I mean,
well, I think you're seeing the real time. Whether how you define that word depends on how you see this, but we're seeing things like Spark come about. We're seeing Yarn, I think, which is critical, basically making Hadoop a more user-friendly platform. So I think that's the direction we're going for sure. But I also think you're going to see a lot deeper integration with existing tools. I think that's really where we're going. Is Hadoop is not a cure-all. It is a very important part of the modern data architectures we've heard. But there are other tools that you need. Part of our survey, we asked, what do you even consider big data? What does that mean from a technology perspective? And of course, Hadoop is a big part of that. But when we talk to practitioners, their big data projects include Hadoop. They include analytic databases like Vertica. They include data integration tools. They include data quality tools. To some extent, they even include, some practitioners include their more traditional data warehouse. So basically, where we see this moving is integration, whether that means integration directly into Hadoop, whether that's running Vertica directly on Yarn in Hadoop, in the same Hadoop cluster as you're doing other workloads, or whether it's side by side. Where we're going is integrating this into a more seamless architecture, a more elegant architecture. And what tools that means will emerge in the next few years, I can't necessarily tell you that, but I do know it's going to be a much more seamless part of the enterprise data center, and it's going to be a much more mainstream part of the enterprise data center.
I want to ask you about the organizational considerations. So, we love to talk about technology, but as practitioners and business technology people, organization is very important. There was a schism in the survey, and it's somewhat of a concern between the perceptions of the IT folks versus the business folks in terms of the degree to which their big data projects are paying off. I wonder if you could talk about that, and I wonder if we could maybe get some audience feedback on that and what you guys are seeing.
Yeah, I would love to hear from the audience on this as well. So, we asked, we were trying to gauge essentially how practitioners feel about the relative success of their big data analytics projects. So admittedly, it's a subjective question, but I think it's telling. So, we asked practitioners, do you feel like you've gotten the full value of your investment in big data technology and services? And then we gave a few different options. Yes, we've achieved the full value. We've achieved partial value, but moving in the right direction.
One of the spectrum questions.
Yeah, so one of the spectrum questions. But one of the interesting things that came out of that question was the difference between IT and the business. The IT practitioners who answered our survey have a much rosier perception of the relative success of their projects than the business side.
Because the technology worked, presumably.
Well, right. So the hard numbers are about 54% of our IT practitioners who answered the survey said they feel like they've gotten the full investment of their full value of their investment in big data technology and services, where it was only about, I think, 18% or so of the business side felt they've gotten the full value. And really, when you dig into that number, I think a couple things are happening. One is how each of the two groups kind of measures success. From an IT perspective, a lot of what you're doing there is standing up the technology, procuring the hardware, standing up the Hadoop cluster, integrating it with some other tools, and really getting the infrastructure up and running. The business side is less interested in the infrastructure. A business person really doesn't care if it's Hadoop. With all due respect, doesn't care if it's Hadoop or Vertica or anything else under the covers. They want answers to their questions. They want insights from their data. And that's a much different challenge than standing up some technology. So I think that's part of the challenge there. I think the technology is maturing to the point where IT is fairly confident, and the more technical side is confident they can get it up and running. Actually analyzing, interrogating that data, and then communicating it to business people in a way that they can actually do something with it, that's a whole different challenge. So I think that's one aspect. And related to that, I think it's also a lot of the IT practitioners who responded to our survey were also not just the ones standing up the technology, they're actually using the technology themselves. They're using it to ingest log data from their data centers, network traffic, that kind of thing. So they're also practitioners, and they're, generally from a technology standpoint, they're technology practitioners. They're going to be a little bit more savvy, so they might have a little bit more success in terms of deriving insights from that type of data.
Does anybody have a point of view on this in terms of either IT people or business people or projects that you've run? Have they worked? All right, great. We've got some audience participation here. So interested what you've done, what your experience is. Are you a business person? Are you an IT person? Maybe you could, when you ask the question or make the comment, you could sort of introduce your perspective.
I'm Michael Embry with Sabre, a travel company. So I think it's sort of a trick question. If you say that, hey, Hadoop, which we have deployed a Hadoop system a couple years ago, it's relatively inexpensive compared to other solutions we could have done. And in fact, the reason we deployed it was there was a data set that was just too big to capture and store and analyze before. So with the investment that we made in it and the time we spent on it, one particular analytics project essentially paid for it. But we really haven't gotten it from the business perspective. I would say we really haven't gotten the big bang from big data that you read about, which is, I guess, why we're also looking at Vertica now, because our analysts need faster access, more capabilities perhaps, or easier access. So I think it is somewhat of a trick question. However, I have a question about the way Hadoop, big data, and analytics is being discussed is mostly about, and I think every one of you has used the term the customer and the business, which really implies making money. I need to sell more. How is big data and analytics, or when is it going to be used to really improve the human condition? And I know there are a few sessions that are talking about that, but I think it's possible, I think anyway, from what I read, that there's a lot more improvements in the human condition that can be driven by the amount of data that we have, in particular medical and cancer research. What's your perspective on, do I just use it to sell more, or do I do good?
So that's a great question, and of course, Jeff Hammerbacher, very famous from Facebook Cloudera, for saying, the best minds of my generation spending all their time trying to get people to click on ads. Many of you have heard that.
That came up in the Cube yesterday. We were talking about retargeting, which is a technical term for ad tech geeks. That basically, when you go to a website and you're just surfing, and then you go to, let's say, you're back to your Facebook page, the ads change based upon what you surf. So I've been seeing the Sheraton ads. I was trying to figure out where I'm going to take my kids during the winter break, and I'm not going there. I just was checking out the availability, and I just can't get rid of the ad. I had to actually get rid of it. Short-term profits, that looks good on paper. They probably got some sales increase, but they pissed me off, and I'm unhappy about it, right? So there's a negative backlash. This brings up the question at hand here, which is, what's the long-term consequence of the short-term profits for arbitraging using the data for value? So I believe that that's a huge issue that the industry will talk about, and ultimately it's going to come down to how you free your data, which could be a compliance issue, to who you hire as a culture, and it's about principles, I think.
Well, we saw Conservation International yesterday. That's one obvious
Exactly,
case.
and you'll see them again tomorrow. There's another panel tomorrow morning, and we are running out of time, so I'll close this out by saying there's also at least 2 breakout sessions on big data and life science. I know there's a panel discussion that Jeff Healy's moderating. Hopefully that wasn't yesterday. I don't know where in the agenda it is. There's also a session immediately after this that I'm actually going to be on in the ecosystem track. I mean, something like 70% of Vertica customers use Vertica for some form of customer analytics, so certainly that's a big use case. But there's lots of others as well, whether it's saving the environment, saving lives. And so the human impact, absolutely, we're a big believer in that. And as hopefully we've shown you and will continue to show you, and customers will continue to tell you here, that's very much what this is all about as well.
Well, and you're certainly seeing in financial services, fraud detection is one of the big use cases. Now, granted, there's a financial incentive there, but healthcare, we were at MIT a couple of weeks ago, and hearing what's happening with data in healthcare is very interesting. Do you have a perspective on this? And then we got a break.
I mean, certainly, you could run down some of the use cases that we're seeing out there, whether it's, mapping the human genome to create more personalized medicine. We're seeing it in, energy, a more efficient use of energy, which obviously has an impact on the planet. But I would say these are big problems. And again, technology, whether it's Hadoop or anything else, it's just an enabler. And it's not a magic wand where, you can just point Hadoop at it and you're going to solve the problem. This is still going to take time. It's still going to take smart people working really hard on these problems. I think that's the direction we're moving. I think the relationship to the more commercial use, I mean, is important, because in order to really, for the ecosystem and for the vendor community to really continue developing these tools, you need to have a commercial aspect to it. If it's simply for, these, for nonprofit type of use cases, the market's not going to grow as fast. So I think the more commercial use cases are a good thing in that they are going to help spur the development of these tools. Profit speaks, so that's going to help develop the tools, and these tools can then be applied to other use cases as well. So I would say they go hand in hand. I would just keep a watch out. People are working really hard on some of these problems. We talk to practitioners all the time in healthcare and energy and other areas that are working hard on these problems. Right. So it does take time, and ultimately, just to kind of follow up on a point you made earlier, Dave. We often get asked, who's going to be the big winner in this market? Is it going to be a Hortonworks? Is it going to be another company? Is it going to be HP? Whoever? I think, as you mentioned earlier, the real winners, the big winners out of this are going to be the practitioners, people in this audience who are going to come up with really novel ways to solve problems with data that we sitting on that stage can't even think of right now.
Yeah, and we absolutely want the customers to win, and that's why you're all here. So I want to thank John, Dave, Jeff. They'll all be outside on theCUBE. Keep the conversation going there. Keep it going on Crowd Chat and Twitter. And keep it going out throughout the conference. So thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris. Take off for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before everybody else leaves the room, we've got a couple of quick housekeeping notes. I just want to make a few points. Once again, in the Haven track, the 9:40 and the 10:30 sessions are reversed on your schedule. We've also got, with the breakouts do start now, the conference level, the upper tracks, there will be lunch in the Galleria in the partner zone, prime time, and then in the grand ballroom later today, hopefully you'll all be back here to hear Tom Davenport, our true big data visionary. We're really looking forward to that as well. So thanks, everybody. We'll let you go to the track sessions. Please stop by theCUBE, keep the conversation going, and have a great rest of the day.
I've been losing sleep, dreaming about the things that we could be. But baby, I've been praying hard. Said no more counting dollars, we'll be counting stars.